going to talk about this a bit more with Nader Hashemi, who's an associate professor of Middle East politics at Georgetown University, and he joins us live now from Aspen in Colorado. Nader, thank you so much for coming on TRT World. How damaging are these strikes and other attacks we've seen over the last 2 weeks for Hezbollah, for their leadership, for their ability to operate, but also for the level of support that they might enjoy? Would there be some people looking at this and thinking, gosh, this isn't the group that we've been led to believe that they are?
I would distinguish between those two positions that you articulated. Hezbollah has been deeply shaken and wounded by these attacks, starting with the communication devices that Israel was able to explode, killing many Hezbollah leaders, but also many civilians. And then since then, a very concerted attempt by Israel to effectively decapitate the leadership of Hezbollah. So it's clear that they've been deeply wounded. The last speech that Nasrallah gave admitted that these attacks had hurt Hezbollah. There's no doubt about that. I think everyone agrees that Hezbollah has been deeply wounded. Will it make a difference, though, in the long term? Let's not forget that Hassan Nasrallah succeeded to the head of the organization after his predecessor was assassinated by Israel. I don't think that simply killing Hezbollah or senior commanders in Hezbollah is going to kill the organization, largely because Hezbollah is deeply integrated into the fabric of the life of many people in Lebanon, particularly those who are Shia Muslim. The second point that you raised as to whether people will start being disillusioned with respect to Hezbollah and whether it would sort of result in a withdrawal of support for Hezbollah, I think it could actually have the opposite effect. The more Israel demonstrates its brutality, let's not forget that there are many civilians, innocent civilians, who are dying in these strikes. Reportedly, in the hit on Nasrallah today, it was in a very crowded area, 6 apartment buildings. I'm seeing reports of 300 people being killed. That's going to generate more anger, more hatred, and more recruitment for Hezbollah down the road. So while this is a setback, I don't think it's sort of anywhere, it should be suggested anywhere that this is the end of the organization.
And we have seen some rockets fired from Hezbollah over into Lebanon today and a few over the last few days. The response, though, has been fairly limited. Do you think that is a calculated, strategic response from Hezbollah? Or do you think actually that they have been quite badly impacted and that's limiting their ability to do anything right now much?
That's a great question. You're right, they have been quite limited. And you would think that given the strike today, that Hezbollah would unleash its most prized possessions in its arsenal. The fact that it hasn't, I think, perhaps convinces me that the organization has been deeply shaken and deeply wounded. The other thing I'm thinking about right now is that, there's been a lot of talk, particularly in the West, of Hezbollah being this all-powerful, sort of formidable organization that has 150,000 missiles and rockets. That's often, I think, I'm reading that perhaps as an exaggeration. There's a standard sort of position to exaggerate the military threat of your enemies. I'm reminded of the Cold War, when in the last decade of the Soviet Union, there were reports in the United States. Many people believed that the Soviet Union was expanding militarily, was getting stronger and bigger, when it was actually collapsing from within. So we could see a similar situation happening right now. In other words, the claim that Hezbollah was this formidable organization with all of these missiles perhaps was a gross exaggeration, a miscalculation over their actual potential. And so if they don't start, I think, firing back at Israel very soon, especially if Nasrallah is killed, then I think it's pretty conclusive that the organization has been deeply rattled and is unable to respond to Israel in the way that many of us thought they could.
But I guess going back to my first question, that's what I meant. If this is an organization that's rattled and that ultimately, it is primarily this military organization, as you say, these estimates ranging 100,000, 150,000 of these rockets, if they don't start firing them, won't people start to think, well, kind of what's the point of Hezbollah? We've been led to believe that they're strong, that they're determined, and yet we're not seeing that. Surely that will have an impact on its grassroots support.
I agree. People will ask those questions. They'll wonder why Hezbollah hasn't fired back. Whether that will lead to diminished support for Hezbollah in a significant way, that remains to be seen. I'm not certain one will necessarily result. In other words, a weakened Hezbollah response will result in a significant drop in their support, as long as Israel continues to behave in the way that we've seen it behaving, not just in Lebanon, but also in Gaza. That's going to ensure that there's a constituency for people to rally around organizations that are perceived to be resisting Israeli policy in the region. So in that sense, I don't think there's going to be a problem for Hezbollah going forward in gaining new recruits.
Now, as we're talking, we're seeing these really quite significant fires burning across Beirut. How do you see Israel proceeding from here? Do you think they'll carry on a campaign of targeted, in their words, airstrikes on, as they say, Hezbollah locations, Hezbollah targets? Or do you see them actually proceeding via some kind of limited or perhaps broader land incursion? What do you think might happen?
A land incursion or invasion is a big risk for Israel. Every time they've tried that, they've got their nose bloodied. So I suspect that's a lot of bravado and talk. I think the big plan here is to start a broader regional war. As we saw from Netanyahu's speech today and in his rhetoric in the past, he wants to go after Iran. He wants to draw Iran in. He wants to get the United States to enter this war. That's the big plan. So in many ways, whether Nasrallah is killed today or not is really beside the point. And I think the goal of Netanyahu here is to start a regional war, to hit Hezbollah, hoping that Iran will come to its rescue, and then allowing Netanyahu to broaden the war, bringing the United States into this war. I think that's very much the calculation. I'm skeptical about a ground invasion because, Israel does not have a good track record. And I don't think the Israeli public would be supportive of a major ground invasion because the memories of what happened in 2006, I think, are still very fresh in people's minds in Israel.
And you mentioned Iran there. What do you expect from Iran? We've had some comments in the last hour, but what's going on there? What do you expect from the Iranian leadership in the short term, but possibly also in a longer time frame?
Yeah, that's a great question. I suspect if Hezbollah is significantly weakened, that will incentivize the Iranian regime to ramp up and advance its nuclear program, to even go as far as to test the nuclear weapon. Because from Iran's perspective, supporting Hezbollah was part of Iran's broader regional defense strategy, hoping that Hezbollah would, come to Iran's rescue if it was ever attacked by the United States or Israel. But if Hezbollah is seriously and significantly weakened, that gives every argument that is needed to hardliners in Iran to say, look, this is a major national security threat we're facing now. They're going to come after us. Our only safety valve is to fast track our nuclear program and to test the nuclear weapon. And that's why, we're at a very dangerous point, because that will then, raise major concerns in the West and Israel that we can't allow Iran to proceed down this track. And then there'll be demands to hit Iran's nuclear facilities. So I think that's very much what Iran is thinking now, especially if the reports are true that, Nasrallah is killed and Hezbollah's senior leadership and most of its assets are destroyed in these Israeli bombing raids. Then I think the response from Iran would be to play the nuclear card.
OK, Nader Hashemi, worrying prospect indeed. Thank you so much for joining us with that analysis on TRT World.